Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our second session of Memory University 2022. My name is Dr. Sophia Wong. I'm an assistant professor of clinical psychiatry at the Indiana University School of Medicine. I'm also the outreach, recruitment, and engagement core leader for our Indiana Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which is funded through a P30 grant from the National Institute on Aging. And I'll be moderating today's session with our special guest, Ms. Anita Hardin. She's going to be talking about common misconceptions about the power of attorneys. Ms. Hardin is an Indianapolis native, but she got her law degree at the University of Houston, Texas, and was admitted to the Indiana bar in 1995. Since then, she's been the attorney running her own elder care law practice, and she has had extensive leadership within the Indianapolis area in terms of senior care. She was the past chair of the SECOA Board of Directors. She serves on our current IADRC Community Advisory Board. And most importantly, she has that firsthand experience of being a caregiver for her mother and father, who both had Alzheimer's, and for her aunt with vascular dementia. I'm also really grateful to be having a couple with us today as special guests, the Gordons, as well as Ms. Nicole Bratberry. Ms. Nicole Bratberry is a very highly successful career woman who's going to share her experience in terms of being a power of attorney and balancing the challenges of professional, personal, and love life while being a caregiver. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ms. Anita Hardin, as well as her guests, the Gordons and Ms. Bratberry. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having you join us for the Q&A with your questions.
Hello, we're talking about the common misconceptions of powers of attorney. And let me talk about what a power of attorney is, first of all. It's a legal document where a person puts in writing who they want to act on their behalf in case they cannot make either healthcare decisions, which is a healthcare power of attorney, or a healthcare declaration called that in the state of Indiana, or a power of attorney, which is sometimes called a durable power of attorney, which designates someone who can make decisions for them on business matters and financial affairs. A power of attorney is good as long as the person who makes it does not either revoke it, or if they die, then it's no longer in effect. And after that, their estate, such as the will, takes over. Before we get into some details regarding the misconceptions, I do want to mention that the Indiana legislature passed a law that has made some changes in the healthcare declaration beginning with January 2023. But do not be concerned. What they did is they made it more flexible for the person who's making it in regards to, for example, instead of having, you can either have two witnesses, or you can sign it at the end, or with the signature, or you can have a notary. It gets rid of the living will part. The living will part basically says that whether you want nutrition, which is food, or hydration in case the doctor says it's imminent of your death, it's getting rid of that portion. Also, the healthcare declaration as of 2023 of January 1 will be more flexible. You can name as many people as you want as your healthcare power of attorney. So there's a few other guidelines that are different, but I just want you to know, if you do one this year and it has all of the current things like you want nutrition or hydration, things of that, never fear, it will still be good. It's just as of January of 2023, it's making the document much more flexible. You can discuss that with your attorney when you get ready to do it. With that being said, normally when I come and do these Memory University, I get into a whole lot of legal things and power of attorneys, but today we're going to talk about misconceptions in carrying out those powers of attorney over health and finance that aren't discussed in the document. I wanted to interview sets of people, Nicole Bratberry and William and Natalie Gordon, because this is a specific generation. I call them the Gen Xers, the people who are born between, I would say, the 1960s, 1970s. They typically are in their 40s and 50s now. Why they are a unique group is because we call them the sandwich generation. They're sandwiched in between still having children that they care for, but at the same time having to be powers of attorney, say, for example, over their parents or their grandparents. And so first we're going to take a look at a couple who is doing this in a magnificent way. We have William and Natalie Gordon. How are you?
Hi. Good. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being on. First of all, I want you to tell them, who are you power of attorney over, and what type? Is it health? If it's business in terms of finances? If it's both?
Well, we at one time were powers of attorneys over our grandparents. We had powers of attorneys over the grandfather, the grandmother, and a parent. So at that time, it was 3 people, and it was a power of attorney over financial as well as health.
That's a lot. So I want to ask you, William, what do you think some of the misconceptions are and challenges regarding being a young Gen X couple and having to balance being power of attorney over all of these loved ones in your family? How are you addressing those?
Well, it wasn't just simply legal forms for us. It turned into much more. It became our personal, our professional, and our family life were all affected simultaneously. We did have a preteen and an early teenager at that time. And my wife was a professional accountant, still is. And basically, we realized we would have to make some adjustments in career aspirations to care for the situation at hand. And fortunately, she was very cooperative, kind of put the brakes on her advancement, even walked away for a period because my grandparents, they were both my grandparents, needed the attention. And shortly after that, we lost one of them. And then my father got very ill. We lost him. And then my grandfather was the remaining one. So it was quite a pause for her, and she's very cooperative. So I appreciated that, but it was hard.
So in doing that, you still have to have time for yourselves as a married couple. You put your career on hold. So what does that look like in terms of still maintaining your relationship, splitting these responsibilities? Tell me a little bit about that, Natalie.
Well, it was difficult at the time, but I think in looking back, it was necessary. When you make those adjustments, especially for people that you love, you realize the benefit. It was a benefit for our family. I think our children were able to see their loved ones in a different light. They were able to participate in the care of them. So that helps in the family dynamics, especially at that time. So even though there were challenges, and looking back, there were also benefits as well.
William, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think she was conclusive.
So this is the big question. We're all African American here. And many times when you talk about it, they're not just legal forms. So I want you to discuss what has been your experience as powers of attorney revolve around the cultural experience in the African American community.
Mm-hmm.
William, you start.
Sure. As we would come to appreciate, I'm an only child, so I was very close to my grandparents. But what I came to appreciate is that generation that was born in the 30s, early 30s, late 20s, they have a lot of misconceptions about turning anything over to you. So now the aspects of, them being thrown out of their home, them not being able to access their money or their funds or their savings or their assets. So it constantly became things that I wasn't expecting in terms of trust. And I had to be careful not to equate that with love. It was trust and misunderstanding about, while they were in full control of their comprehensive abilities, that they still would have a say. but I saw some very negative sides and reluctance that go against the cultural norms. And so
Talk about that.
Yeah, so that was difficult because it was very blunt from them what they weren't going to do and why. So there was resistance to any preparation that would help them and us in the long run. So we had to help them to appreciate the legal aspects and the wisdom of doing things a certain way versus not doing anything, because typically people freeze and they keep putting it off and putting it off. And then you look around, people get so sick and it's too late to do anything beneficial. So that was a constant battle. And then even though it's my wife, I'm their grandson. But my wife is the one who's making sacrifices to care for you. So I can't be there. Somebody has to work. She's made sacrifices, but we need some cooperation here. So that's unnatural in our community.
William and Natalie, I'm sorry. I have my theory as to why that distrust is prevalent, because I see that too. But what's your theory as to why?
I've always just felt that generation, maybe those coming from the South to the North during that time, is just a cultural feeling of wanting to hold on to what they've worked so hard for. And so that generation, they're just very reluctant for the reasons of being African Americans coming from the South and what they've had to deal with during that time period. I mean, a lot of it just isn't discussed in our community, what they had to go through in the South, and then when they did come north. So that whole feeling of what I have, I'm going to protect, I'm going to keep it. And so when they do come, and even if it is a family member, even though they may be willing to help you, but the kind of help that we're talking about, that preparation, it's different for them. It's almost like you're taking something away from them that they've worked so hard for. And so they don't see that preparation for the next generation. And so it's very different. And so as a community of African Americans, we can tend to be more reactive instead of proactive when it comes to preparing for our loved ones in power of attorneys or preparing for funerals and that type of thing. So I just think that has been a crippling effect in our community in dealing with preparing for situations like that. But
I agree with the both of you. And though I'm an elder law attorney, I experienced that when I was power of attorney over my parents. And so what would be both of your advice of anybody, even if they're not African American, if they're dealing with the issues of reluctance by their loved ones to relinquish some control, in terms of how do you deal with that as the power of attorney, or even getting them to do a power of attorney?
I would say, I think Bill mentioned a point about don't misuse or don't think about it as that they don't love you. You know, don't think because they don't trust you that they don't love you. It's not that. And then just be very open and honest and very open book about what exactly you're doing. You know, when it comes to the bank accounts, you know, take them to the bank with you, you know, be just very transparent. You know, don't do anything that they cannot see up front, and just slowly let them begin to trust everything that you're doing. And then over time, that trust will come.
I agree. Go ahead, Wayne.
And I've thought more about that question too, Anita. Sometimes you have to help them appreciate that the state has a lot of power, the state or the government. And if we don't use the laws that have been written for our advantage, which means you have to know them, then this is not going to be beneficial for you or for us. So let's mutually work together and understand the laws because the laws help them understand the fiduciary role that we play, which is not an all authority role. We have limitations here, and others have oversight to keep us from unintentionally abusing you in any way. They need to know their protections for them.
That's good. So what or how has that made you two think, being the sandwich generation, we better have our stuff in order? Talk about that a little bit.
I think for us, it most definitely has helped with just our parents, because these were our grandparents that we were dealing with and his dad. But in relation to our parents, our mother, his mother, we've had these very frank, upfront conversations so that we don't run into the same hurdles that we did. And then even in preparing for our children, we are very open about, okay, we're going to do this with this house when you guys are older. We're going to move into something smaller. We're going to do this. So there are no surprises with our children. They really know our plans ahead of time. They know what we want to do. They know where things are. And so that we don't run into the same problems that we had earlier on.
Good. And finally, any additional advice that you would give either a person who is acting as a power of attorney for their loved one or trying to get their loved one to do a power of attorney?
Well, I think a start would be to give due consideration to forums such as this one and present those in the current time. So many video possibilities with devices to help our older ones appreciate these things, even informally so, because they may not be able to take it directly, but in short snippets, indirectly, it fertilizes the ground for what we will have to deal with. And when they see people like them talking about these types of things, backed by the legal things, now becomes palatable. And we look forward to more success for future generations because it's necessary.
Excellent. Thank you, William and Natalie. This has been good. We've been talking about the common misconceptions regarding powers of attorneys. We're not just talking about the legal things, we're talking about the things that aren't written in the legal documents. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Next, we have another individual who will talk about the common misconceptions of powers of attorneys. But this time, we're going to interview Nicole Bratberry. Now, what's unique about her is she's also of that Gen X, 40s and 50s generation, that sandwich generation, but she's just doing it by herself. She is what I call a super career woman because she's doing it all. And we are welcoming you now, Nicole. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Fine. Thank you for joining me. First of all, Nicole, tell me, what do you do for a living?
I'm actually in education. So I am the department chair over the School of Business, Logistics, and Supply Chain at Ivy Tech Community College for Hamilton County.
Tell me, that's awesome. Tell me some of the other responsibilities, because I'm aware that you have some awards that you've been presented and you're involved in some various outside professional organizations. Tell us a little bit, because this is laying the foundation of where I'm going to go with this topic.
Absolutely. I belong to several organizations outside of work, Sorority Gamma Phi Delta. I am a member at large. Indianapolis Professional Association Group. And I do some volunteering. I still like to volunteer when I have, time to volunteer. And just before this segment, I was in a previous meeting. I'm also, I sit on a board for accreditation body, which is ACBSP, which is accreditation for business schools and programs. And I just found out today that I am vice chair, so I would bump up to chair. So that's a big responsibility because I'd be over our regional for colleges and universities.
The reason, Nicole, I laid the foundation for this topic is because I know you're also power of attorney. So I want to know who in your family your power of attorney, if you don't mind answering that? And what type of power of attorney, whether it's health, whether it's business, finances, or both?
I'm actually a power of attorney over mom and dad and sister. And so I have power of attorney for mom and dad for health and finances, and for sister, it is health.
So, what are the current challenges you face in trying to juggle your busy career, being power of attorney over your mother, your father, and your sister in terms of health and finances? And not just that, trying to strike a balance with a personal life, a spiritual life, emotional, your health, the whole bit.
Some challenges that I find is just, I've got to squeeze everything in. And I know what people, the phrase of work-life balance, but I call it work-life blend. How do you blend in everything that you're currently doing? And so I've come across challenges with, like the previous couple with the Gordons, you have that generation to where especially my mom, I have built this connection since I've been to POA with my mom because, that was that trust factor, and I'm saying, and I'm the baby. I'm the baby of all of my siblings. I have, a family where I have a blended family, siblings on my mom's side, siblings on my dad's side, but everybody comes to me. And so they come to baby sister for everything, even for approval. But my mom, she was just so prepared for a lot of things. And so over the years, I have gained her trust to where she has allowed me to come in and handle the finances. So at first, that was a challenge there, gaining that trust from mom. Hey, you're going to be okay, so I'm going to make sure you're taken care of along with dad, and that was transpired to my sister as well, her health, because 2 years ago, I had to make a lot of decisions when she felt greatly ill. But mom, has allowed me to pretty much, handle everything. She puts everything in my hand. Matter of fact, she calls me anytime she gets anything. She calls me and say, what do you think? How should I handle this? I'm going to put this in your hands. Even telling the doctors, hey, don't call me to make appointments. Call my daughter. She oversees that for me. And so, but what I do, I am an organized person. And so everything's on the schedule. My iPhone and my iPad is my walking schedule. I schedule everything. And I mean, from even going to the gym, scheduling my meetings, meeting with friends, everything is scheduled 7 days a week. That's how I stay together. But that's part of me. I've always been an organized person. I'm also a person who I am a person that puts things in action. If my mom calls me, I'm on the phone calling, putting things in place. I'm an executor. And so that's how I overcome some barriers or challenges there, because I'm also, I'm a resourceful driven person. I like resources. So if I have a huge network, if I need something, I have no problem giving that person a call to gain, resources. So I'm down the right path. So that's how I overcome those challenges, and just blending in what I have coming in, so it's not, overwhelming or stressful for me.
Nicole, let me ask you a question, because if you don't mind, in knowing your mother, and you talk about that trust, and a misconception sometimes is the parent or the grandparent has always been where they relied on you. Your mom has always been a superwoman herself, a business owner. She is just amazing. So I'm sure in giving up some of the independence to you as a power of attorney, and she was your mentor, how has that been for her and for you, switching those roles?
Well, it took her some time, but like you said, I learned from her. Until I became her power of attorney, I had no idea this woman had things in place because she was a planner. And, so even all the way coming to where I had to go to like Crown Hill to make sure things were in place for her. She had bought all of our whole family, all of her children's plots. We have a headstone. Even my dad, she placed everything in place. So she says, here you go. This is in place. When it comes to that time, it's set for you, and so I learned that, that, okay, I know this is in place. And it got me to thinking, I should have this in place for myself as well, because she ran a business. My dad, was an engineer. He retired in his 70s. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the 90s. And otherwise, if he didn't have that disease, he probably would still be going because he was the breadwinner of the family, But my mom was definitely that planner, And so handing that to me, it's like, okay, she still wants her independence, So I give her that. But then, like I said, it took a while for the trust. And she's like, we're partners now.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Nicole, many times, and I even experienced this as being a power of attorney and caregiver, there's this perception that I have to put my life to a certain extent on hold because it is overwhelming. You talked about how you stay healthy emotionally and spiritually, but tell me, is it possible, because I didn't at the time, to have a personal life? And if so, tell me, if you don't mind sharing, do you have one?
Absolutely. I'll say this. I'm a nutritional coach. And so I am a huge advocate for taking care, self-care, mentally, spiritually, wholeheartedly taking care of yourself. When my parents became sick, even my mom, I was like, okay, we need to change your diet. That was a struggle too. Because my mom, takes a lot of medications. I said, well, Mom, let's look at some things we can change so you come off some of these medications, and that was a struggle. But for me, I take care of my health because that contributes to my personal life, with my, being a person in a higher position. I, go to work with a smile. Every day I get up and spin. I go to the gym. That's how I start my day. I have a couple clients that I also have, help with nutritional needs as well. And so, but I practice what I preach. But I'm also a meditation practitioner. And so I meditate every night and journal. That helps me distress, And so that, is part of keeping the personal together. But before, I meditate and journal, I also read a passage from my Bible. I do that every night. And so that helps me. And I write down positive affirmations, that helps me to tell myself, it's okay. It's good. You're going to be okay. And I take everything slowly. I'm not a person that, that just acts up on impulse. I think it through. And you talk about personal life. Yes, I do, because it is possible to have a relationship. Can you believe that?
I noticed you were smiling so much. So if you don't mind me asking, can you be power of attorney over health and finances, looking after your loved ones, and have a love life? If you don't mind me asking, a healthy one.
Absolutely, because the individual, that understands what I'm going through, that individual has experienced that as well. And so that individual offers support. And so I think, if you're going into a relationship and ready to go into a relationship, and it took some time for me before I, opened that door to go back into a relationship, have those conversations, let that person know, hey, I'm kind of running two households. I'm doing this and this and this, and the person in my life understood and it's like, hey, you know what? I'm also taking care of my mom. He lost his dad, but he's also taking care of his mom. He says, well, your schedule's busy just like mine. So we distress and relax on the weekends. We call each other. And so, but getting to know that person, and that person has an understanding for what you're going through, and maybe can be a support partner as well. And so it is possible to have a relationship, but go into it was like, having those conversations so that person understands, this is what I'm currently doing for my parents, my loved ones, and they're going to become times where, I may not be available a lot of times, but hey, it doesn't mean that I don't care or I'm not interested, just let them know, hey, I'm interested. I like to learn more about, where our relationship can go. So, but I've had people tell me, you're glowing. I said, I am. Oh, I didn't know.
You are. That's why I had to ask. So with that said, what would be, in wrapping up, your advice to an individual who is single? And it may not be a person who does not have children. They may have children, but they are doing it by themselves. They may even have other siblings, but they're the sole one. And they have power of attorney over their loved ones or their mother, father, grandfather, and they're balancing their career and they're trying to stay healthy mentally, spiritually, emotionally. They want to have a personal life, but they say, oh my gosh, how is this possible? Because even though you've given great tips and you are like the role model for a single person doing it, I know it's not easy for you all the time. So give some advice.
Advice that I would give for an individual who's actually, the person that's doing, by themselves, I say, seek out for support because, I will always seek out support to others who are going through the same thing. For example, for my dad with Alzheimer's, I actually went to a workshop to understand the disease better, and I think that really helped me to understand, my dad. And with my mom, just getting support, going to program. I do a lot of reading too, up on, what happens when you have an elderly person or elderly loved one that you have to now switch the roles that you have to care for. What do you do? So I'm a resourceful person. I like to gain resources. I also ask questions of people who also are in a similar situation as myself, because now a lot of people come to me, for support because they have seen what I've done or watched me. So I just try to gain a lot of resources, get support. One great organization that's very supportive is SACOA, which helped me out tremendously with getting resources for my mom. Because I have an aide that comes in and helps a couple times a week. My mom had
Can I
wait-to-go
stop you
service.
right there? For those of people who don't know, Socola Area Aging is the area aging agency in Marion County, Indiana, that provides all kinds of resources for caregivers and for senior citizens. So go ahead.
Absolutely. And Wheels on Meals on Wheels, so although my mom, she canceled it, but I'm like, okay, you either eat their meals or my meals, but she still loves to cook, which is great, so my dad goes to a wonderful daycare here in Indianapolis and he loves it because he needs that social piece. But you just can't I think that just because they're at home, they don't want to do anything. Get your loved one involved, to go to places. When I put them in the car with me and sightsee, it's like kids. I got 80-year-old kids. It's like, this changed and that changed. When did that get there? They love getting out of the house. It makes them feel better. Do more things for your loved ones who are your POA over. They really do appreciate that because when they get back home, they ready to relax. It's time for nap time then because you've worn them out. So, but I try to do a lot of things with them, but getting resources, like I mentioned, SACOA, which was a great help to me for resources. And then if you can find a support group or individuals who are, going through the same thing, that would be helpful because that's going to bring in room for you to have that personal life, to do different things that you like, because you also have to take care of yourself as well.
Nicole, thank you so much. The advice you've given, along with Natalie and William Gordon, has been just invaluable. I wanted to really stress the misconceptions of powers of attorney over health and finances that aren't written in the legal documents and some of the other things that you have to deal with as you carry out that responsibility. So thank you to all of you.
Okay, well, I think it's great that we have
so many people on board, and we have a number of questions. So Anita, if you want to turn on your camera, and we can just stop sharing the screen for a minute. I think it'd be great to get started with some questions that are already in the chat. So Anita, I think these questions can be answered. You can start off and then I can weigh in perhaps. What are the differences between being a caregiver and power of attorneys? Okay, somebody could be both, but they do not have to be the same. Is that right?
That is correct. And that is an excellent question because that can be a common misconception that they're one and the same. A person who is a caregiver may have a written legal document that allows them as caregiver to be a power of attorney over the health and or over the finances. But a caregiver could also be an individual who doesn't have a legal document. They may be a neighbor, a family member, a friend that comes in and provides meals or bags, or it could be a home health agency that one has hired to come in to play caregiver and take care of that loved one. So they aren't one and the same, the caregiver and the power of attorney, but they can be. The difference is the written power of attorney that is either over health, finances, or both.
I think that's a really great point, Anita. And as a physician, when I work with my, the family members and the loved ones of those who are affected with a dementia, I encourage to actually think about building a caregiver team. And the power of attorney is kind of, in maybe some ways, at least, and I would be curious to hear if you conceptualize it the same way, it is going to kind of take the lead on that team, but you need a team of people, especially as people progress with that dementia. It's not reasonable to expect one person to take on that load. So I'm really glad Nicole mentioned SACOA, and part of what a good elder care attorney does is not just provide the legal part, but also make sure that they get connected to those resources. So I think that's a great point. I think, and you may have seen this, Anita, that sometimes kids move away from their parents, and their parents want to stay where they are. So there's a caregiving team locally, neighbors, friends, hired help, right? But the powers of attorneys are, say, out of state. Is that a possible arrangement? Is that something that you've seen in your practice?
Good question. That is another common misconception, that maybe the power of attorney cannot be out of state. The power of attorney for the state of Indiana can be out of state, and they can build a team not only with themselves, but with people who are locally in the same city. I wanted to add something. We mentioned SACOA, and I said SACOA is in Marion County, Indiana. However, even though they're physically located in Marion County, Indiana, they cover central Indiana. And every county, and even nationwide, has their own area agency on aging. So with the out-of-state power of attorney, what gets sometimes challenging if legal documents need to be signed, it's a little better now because of technology. You can do things online, but many times they do have to have someone locally that can assist. I sometimes tell clients to have maybe once that person develops a power of attorney, if they have an out-of-state loved one that's going to do it, to actually maybe name a co-power of attorney, or having that document that power of attorney that is out of town can delegate in writing authority so that someone locally can handle business for them, or even transact situations where if they have to go there right away and some emergency comes up, that you have someone locally who can step in. So the team approach is very important, whether you're in state or out of state as a power of attorney, because it is very challenging for one person to do it all.
Okay. Well, I see a lot of great questions rolling in. So let's see if we can get to a few more. This is a common issue that comes up. And I think the Gordons related sort of maybe alluded to this rather. So what do you do if you think your loved one needs a POA, or and they're just saying, I'm not going to do this? How do you begin to approach that issue, Anita?
Another misconception and a great question, because powers of attorneys, as we lead into answering your question, only give a person the power that the person who makes it. So once a person, say, for example, gives me power of attorney, it does not take away their power. But if I am still mentally capable of creating a power of attorney, there's no way you can make me do it. So unless I am causing harm to myself or someone else, then you have to be encouraged by your loved ones that this is the best way to do it. In many cases, it may be having the physician talk to that person, because sometimes you think, well, you don't need a power of attorney if you're mentally capable. That is not true. And maybe you have physical limitations that you do. So talk to that loved one. If still that doesn't work and that person is getting to the point that they do not have the mental capacity and therefore it's too late to do it, because in the state of Indiana, you have to be of sound mind to do a power of attorney, then the loved one would have to go to court and get a court ordered guardianship in order to be over that person and handle their affairs. The only thing about that is the court oversees it and it strips that loved one of all of their powers and they become like a child.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nita. And that's where having a really, the family can also reach out to, the primary care doctor. But as someone who practices, just broadly speaking, if somebody is deemed, in my professional opinion, to have capacity, I just tell everybody, we want everyone, no matter how old you are, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, as long as you're 18 and over, it's good to have a power of attorney. It's not because you're 75. And I think sometimes the person making the ask is really crucial. I think when the child makes the ask to the parent, for example, that can carry a lot of huge implications. And I think, somebody else said, well, how do I begin to, justify to my parents that I should be getting them to do a power of attorney? And what I tell them is that there will come a time in almost everybody's life that you may need to make an important decision and you may not be able to, maybe just temporarily, to say you have a tube down your throat and you can't talk. If you don't tell us who you want to make those decisions, the state could pick somebody that you don't want. And if that happens, then you may not end up getting what you want. And actually the POA is what gives you power. I think the other thing worth emphasizing, both to my own healthcare colleagues as well as the people signing the POA or the children, is that somebody can't come in and waive a POA that's legal and say, I'm just taking over. I'm like, wait a second, slow down. I need to talk to your loved one. If they're of sound mind, I can't activate that POA. So POA isn't like, just a takeover card either. It's a backup in the event needed. But and this is really crucial. And a physician or another qualified healthcare professional has to first decide that document is active. It's not active the moment you sign the pen. And I think that's really important and worth just taking a few moments to emphasize, because people really often have that anxiety. And I think sometimes having a neutral party, for example, like the family attorney, the physician or another healthcare professional, emphasize that this is a form of empowerment. It's also a lot cheaper too to do a power of attorney, right, Anita? Guardianship gets very expensive.
Yes, a guardianship will cost several $1,000s in many cases, because that attorney has to go to court and you have to have hearings, where a power of attorney is very, very inexpensive. And you brought up something very important about activation. There's a couple of ways that the power of attorney can be done, whereby that it does not go into effect unless that person becomes incapacitated. And then some type of doctor's certification would have to be done that that person can't act. Or it could be done where it says this power of attorney is effective as of the date it is signed. Then it goes into effect immediately. So trust is a very important factor in doing these documents.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think the other thing, worth, mentioning, is that ideally these conversations shouldn't be contentious.
they should be empowering. And the other really important reason that you want a power of attorney versus guardianship is that in the state of Indiana, a guardianship actually has to be signed by a physician. And I think people can understand with the COVID-19 pandemic, getting to see a physician. And I think you and I had talked about this, the legality of a guardianship evaluation done through telehealth is even still not settled, I think, from what I understand. And so getting an in-person visit with a physician for this express purpose, there's a wait time to that too. And so it's unfortunate, but it is the reality of things. A power of attorney doesn't, require too much, right? They have to be 18 and over, of sound mind is what you legally call it. We in healthcare say the capacity to make medical decisions, and then they need the appropriate number of witnesses and a notary. Correct? Is all that's needed?
That is correct in the state of Indiana. And one other thing that I do want to add, that with the guardianship, the person who is the guardian has to open an account in terms of for that loved one, and every single expense has to be accounted for. There has to be accountings that are reported to the court. Any major decisions financially have to be approved by the court. Any major decisions medically may possibly have to be approved by the court, because when you get a guardianship, there's the portion that's over the person, which is over the health, and there's the person that's over the state, which is over the finances.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It's a big responsibility.
It is truly a lot of work. And I think that brings us to the next question. I guess they said someone's asking what's the best way to get an attorney, but the question in my mind, to be perfectly honest, is what is the best way to get an attorney who, particularly for complex situations, specializes in, elder law? Is there a list somewhere? What is
yes, if you're in the state of Indiana, Indiana has an elder law section of the Indiana Bar. You could probably Google that and get information, or call the Indiana State Bar. Nationally and locally, there's the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, and then there's the Indiana section of Elder Law Attorneys. You can Google that. And then if you're just interested in estate planning, probate, you can contact the Indiana State Bar in regards to estate planning attorneys. Many attorneys who do elder law do both, but those are some of the vehicles that you may want to look into.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting just lots more questions about POA. So I think it's great that we are really generating the conversation. So with the new forms coming, does the Indiana Healthcare Representative form replace a POA, leaving only a financial POA?
The new healthcare representative form addresses healthcare, okay? But it doesn't necessarily replace the financial POA. One of the big differences is, though, is you don't have to be concerned about the healthcare, the living will portion. That will no longer be in effect for the state of Indiana. So I would advise that you still would need the financial POA, but just know with the new laws under the healthcare declaration, many times attorneys will put the living will portion in it. So, and it's just that personally, a person can put more of their own personal wants in that healthcare declaration. It's pretty liberal in that respect.
Okay. And does the POA, does it ever need to be updated? Someone's mentioning here the IRS has a 5-year expiration on financial matters, but do you have to go renew your POA, like an expired, passport or a driver's license? Does that ever happen?
The main two things in the state of Indiana is that the power of attorney is good until the person who creates it revokes it, or until they die. All righty. And it's limited to whatever limitations they put in it. You may have heard the term durable power of attorney. That pretty much covers a lot of things in a lot of aspects that a person can be over as the power of attorney. But you can do a limited power of attorney, which may say you're doing a real estate closing. And so you just want the person to do a limited power of attorney to do that transaction. So it expires upon death or until it's revoked, whichever comes first.
Yeah. I
But
just
you
want
may
to,
have to change it if your POA dies, or if you decide you do want to revoke it because you want another person to do it.
yeah, I just want to add that that even though technically these don't expire, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen as a clinician is somebody literally writes their spouse on the POA and that's it, and their spouse unfortunately passes before them. And then suddenly they're in a bad situation. And so I think, people are like, well, why do I need an attorney, right? I can go print this out and fill it out on my own. Well, yes, technically you could, but that decision-making process that goes into it, I can tell when it's been put thoughtfully together, because probably one of the worst situations I've seen is when somebody filled out their POA, they only put their spouse down. That person, that spouse died. That person now lacks capacity, can't make a new POA, and their kids now have to go to court. And I'm sure you've seen that too, Anita. And
Yes, I have.
it's
I
it's
have.
and then they're heartbroken because I'm like, well, I really would have put like 3 or 4 people, like all sequentially, be like, this person not vote, then this, then this, then this. But especially, even though I hope this pandemic ends soon, we're still in a pandemic. That thought process is really crucial, right, Anita? Having those backup.
That is so true. And why it's so critical in terms of what you're saying is because what I find is many times people do not want to state a lot of alternates because it does give that person so much power. If it's a durable power of attorney, they can basically do anything the person does. So do deeds, change beneficiaries on insurance policy, a lot of things. And so when I hear a person say, I want an alternate, or I want to name a co-person to act, but I'm not sure. And when I see them say, oh, I'm not sure, I say, stop right there. If you have any doubt, then we're not going to do it, because you have to have a total trust in the person that you give that power to.
Yeah. But I think also having that attorney there can help talk through, unfortunately, if you
That
need
is
plan
true.
B or C, like people have like, oh, I'm gonna like, my wife is gonna outlive me and take care of me like she always have. And then heaven forbid it doesn't work out that way. And then they didn't put that plan B there and it's too late medically. And someone's asking, like about activating the POA, I assume the medical POA, does it have to be a medical party, or can that person willingly grant those powers? They say, I'm the POA, but the person that I'm POA for, like they technically, I think, have capacity, but they rather I answer the question. So how does that work legally from your perspective, Anita?
From my perspective, legally, if whatever the legal document says, that's what other entities and individuals have to go by, whether it's the healthcare power of attorney for the physicians and healthcare agencies, whether it's the financial and business for those parties, because they have to protect themselves legally too. So ultimately, if there's any conflict, whatever the document says, that's what you go by.
Yeah. So I want to add that, from my perspective, we don't activate the POA until somebody, lacks decisions to, lacks capacity to make medical decisions. Now, if somebody wants to do what I call, quote, shared decision making, and it's something that can be done whether or not the POA is active, that's something I encourage. For example, should you pursue this treatment, which may or may not work for this cancer? We don't require that that person makes that decision on their own. So if somebody says like, I feel more comfortable having my kid, who's a physician, weigh in on the conversation, that's perfectly legal and okay, even if that person has full capacity. But technically, it would be the person with capacity signing on the line, right, when they do the consent. But you can have as many people weigh in as you want legally, right, Anita, even if you have full capacity.
That is very true. Also, too, I encourage my clients to do what is called a Hipaa authorization release, which is a document that basically says, in so many words, I have given healthcare power of attorney to someone else. But if this other party, could be other children, comes in and wants to discuss the details, this authorizes the medical practitioners to discuss or release it, even though they may not have decision-making power. Yeah. And also a lot of healthcare declarations say that you should have, I want family members to weigh in on it. The good thing about what you're saying, under this new law, you can pretty much write in any of that you want. You can be very specific on those kinds of things that we're talking about.
Okay. I think we have time just for one more question, though we have a lot of great questions. If you didn't get your question answered, please email us at iadrc@iu.edu. We can still get your questions to Anita Hardin answered. So we really appreciate it. So final question. This is a great question because I get this all the time as a doctor. What's the benefit of listing the POA in a medical emergency when the person listed on the PO is next of kin? Like, wouldn't your next of kin automatically make the healthcare decisions?
That is correct. If you do not have a POA, and I think I'm answering this question right. If you don't have a POA, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, so they're saying like, if I'm married, right, legally, and if I just list my spouse as the POA, why should I bother to make a POA then if it's just going to be my spouse, if that's the legal order?
That is the legal order. But I'm going to tell you, sometimes it gets really sticky, especially in second marriages, third marriages, where there may be dynamics within the family that are not congruent, or siblings that may have ulterior motives. And so you do not want to put the medical practitioners or the financial, if it's a regular POA, in a situation where they're having to deal with a lot of things going on when they just want to do their job. So I'd say the more you have it tight and in writing, the better. Otherwise, today with the blended family, you can get into a lot of issues of dynamics of families when someone is sick, because that's typically when all the emotions arise, when people are sick. And it's so make it easier. I've had people say, oh, we get along fine now, da, 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 da. But let something happen, the emotions come up, and everybody's not on the same page, then we have matters.
No, I think that's a great point, Anita. The next of kin law from Indiana state law really shouldn't be, it's like the default state, and it's not a guaranteed default state. And even though marriage, they would think would be as strong a legal bond as could be, I think with blended families, I've also been in the situation in which, they were concerned, for example, that the spouse has dementia and is making bad decisions, even though technically, like, it is common, especially for these older couples, unfortunately, for one to develop dementia and the other one to start showing signs of early dementia potentially. And so, it gets very legal, it starts to get very legally complicated with kids from two different marriages, stepkids who said, well, I'm actually the one taking care of this, so I should be in charge, even though I'm not the biological child. So really having that written out, and not letting the default law be the decider is I think the way to go, right, Anita?
That is correct.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. 100%.
Yeah. I always tell people to think about, did you ever go with your family to go get ice cream, right? Did everybody get the same flavors with the same topping and the same type of cone and, the exact same number of scoops? And if the answer is everybody in my family walked out with something different, and I'm like, well, you're asking somebody at 2:00 in the morning to all make the same decision on the same type of ice cream, except it's your life. It's not ice cream. And so I try to help people think about, like, they say, oh, my family 3 and I get along. And I'm like, yeah, they might get along, but we doctors can't give chocolate and then vanilla. Like, we either intubate or we don't intubate. We either give IV antibiotics or don't. These are very bimodal decisions. And so I don't think people realize that. And so trying to help them understand that these legal documents kind of take out well, my kid likes chocolate, this other kid likes vanilla. I'll let the two of them work out whether to get chocolate or vanilla. I'm like, no, don't do that to your kids.
I want to address one other final misconception, is that the powers of attorney over finances covers every entity. For the most part, it does, with the exception of the federal government, like the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Administration. A lot of your federal agencies do not recognize powers of attorney. They have their own fiduciary forms. They will recognize a court order decree from a guardianship or conservatorship, but they do not honor that. So in that particular case, if you need power over somebody and the person doesn't have capacity to handle their affairs, you would need to fill out their fiduciary papers.
That's right. You have to set it up to be a payee, and
That
perhaps
is correct.
yes, that's perhaps maybe next year's topic when you come back, Anita. I want to thank everyone so much. If we didn't get to your questions, please, we're still here for you. Email us at idrc@iu.edu. We'll get your question to Anita Hardin and get you an answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next week. I'd like to thank everyone for today's talk. I want to thank Anita as well as her guests for sharing their personal lives about how being a caregiver has changed their lives legally. We really welcome your feedback. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey after the webinar. And we also hope that you will stay in touch with our Alzheimer's Use Research Center. You can email us or call us, as well as come onto our website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. If you weren't able to join us for last week's talk, or you want to hear last week's talk and this week's talk again, all these talks will be posted on our Facebook. We also want to encourage you to join us for the next upcoming 2 talks. Dr. Robert Russell will be talking next Friday on understanding the challenges of delivering Alzheimer's care in minority populations. And then I'll be giving an update on what we know so far about COVID-19 and the effects that it may have long-term on people's thinking and memory. So again, thank you so much for joining us today's Memory University, and we look forward to meeting you at our next Memory University session with Dr. Robert Russell.